ABC5's Richard Engel that he was wrong.
Yeah,
remember he came out and I was defending him. No, Dan, he was in the lab, and then he went to the wet market, and this guy died. Remember the original guy who died from COVID because he ate the bat, and all a lie. You were right, Dan. I was wrong.
Well, I mean, this is being received in circles of people that are actually skeptical of what our alleged betters in government say and have been for some time, particularly as you reflect back on the last 3 years and you ask yourself the question, I'm sorry, did these people at CDC, NIH, et cetera, all the alphabet soup agencies, did they get anything right about COVID? Anything?
God, because masks, New York Times came out and said masks don't work. Citing a study, but 7% efficiency even for N95 masks.
Asymptomatic spread, the efficacy of vaccines. I mean, it's just on and on and on. So this is former CDC director Robert Redfield. This is 2 years ago, almost.
Okay.
June of 21, because we've been debating this origination issue and getting to the bottom of the origination issue because, of course, there are all sorts of compelling reasons for America to get to the bottom of this origination issue, particularly if it was something that was cooked up and or covered up by the Chinese Communist government. This is Robert Redfield talking about Tony Fauci's lack of intellectual curiosity after Redfield was safely out of CDC.
There's an alternative hypothesis that it went from a bat virus, got into a laboratory where in the laboratory it was taught, educated, it evolved so that it became a virus that could efficiently transmit human to human. My professional opinion as a virologist is that's the hypothesis that I support. Other individuals, Tony Fauci, for example, would say that he prefers to support that it evolved from nature. I think those are the two hypotheses. I think Tony is holding on to this hypothesis tightly. Now, why would that be? Sometimes scientists, when they get on, they bite into a bone on a hypothesis, it's hard for them to move on. I guess if I'm disappointed about anything about the early scientific community, is that there seemed to be lack of openness to pursue both hypotheses.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Redfield was part of that lack of openness, but at least he came to being a little bit more open once he was out of CDC. And the idea of Tony Fauci being a little shih tzu with a bone in his mouth, that does actually ring true to me on a range of issues. Well, here's what NSA, National Security Advisor for the big guy, Jake Sullivan, Jake from the State Department as opposed to Jake from State Farm, if you will. Here's what he said about the DOE report. You won't be surprised.
There's a chance that this was created in a lab. There's an investigation.
Without having had a single conversation since the war began between President Xi and President Zelensky.
Apparently we don't have that. I don't know why. Jake Sullivan essentially said, can I neither confirm nor deny?
Oh, of course. Of course. But I mean, the thing is, was the lab leak an accident or purposeful?
Well, that's a secondary question. And the whole, some intelligence folks believe this and other experts believe that, virologists like Robert Redfield. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Gordon Chang, an expert on Chinese communist policies and how that government operates. He is author of The Coming Collapse of China, as well as The Great U.S.-China Tech War. You can follow him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang, C-H-A-N-G, Gordon G. Chang on Twitter. Gordon Chang, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Dan and Amy.
So your reaction to not only the DOE revelation, as reported by the Wall Street Journal, but also the Jake Sullivan comment, and here it is. We've got it.
Well, Dana, there is a variety of views in the intelligence community. Some elements of the intelligence community have reached conclusions on one side, some on the other. A number of them have said they just don't have enough information to be sure. Here's what I can tell you. President Biden has directed repeatedly every element of our intelligence community to put effort and resources behind getting to the bottom of this question. And one of the things in that Wall Street Journal report, which I can't confirm or deny, but I will say the reference to the Department of Energy, President Biden specifically requested that the national labs, which are part of the Department of Energy, be brought into this assessment because he wants to put every tool at use to be able to figure out what happened here. And if we gain any further insider information, we will share it with Congress and we will share it with the American people. Yeah. But right now, there is not a definitive answer that has emerged from the intelligence community on this question.
It's interesting. So Jake from the State Department, he tasked the Department of Energy, and the Department of Energy fulfilled the task, and they concluded that it came from the lab, but we still don't know.
Right, because two members of the department, two of the group that they assembled, say it's inconclusive.
All right, so what say you, Gordon Chang, to that response?
Well, first of all, Jake Sullivan is, in a sense, correct, because there are 18 intelligence agencies, and not all of them are coming up with intelligent answers. Clearly, there's a lot more to learn. And when Jake Sullivan says, oh, look, we need we're trying to pursue every avenue, the point is that President Biden has had 5 phone or video calls with Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, and 1 in-person meeting, which was last November at the G20 in Bali, and not once has our president raised the issue of the origins of COVID-19. This is something that has killed more than 1.1 million Americans, according to Johns Hopkins. You'd think he might be a little bit curious about this, but no. The Department of Energy report is obviously right that there was a leak from the lab. I think the Department of Energy should have gone one step further and said this looks also to be an engineered pathogen, not just a leak of a stored pathogen. And we need to know this because China is working on a lot of other pathogens. They call it specific ethnic genetic attacks. These are pathogens that will leave the Chinese immune and kill everybody else. And we need to deter Xi Jinping from spreading the next disease because that could be the civilization killer.
So that Wuhan lab is still open and operating?
Yes, it is still open and operating, and it's only one of a number of labs across China which engage in military work. And the reason why, you played the clip from Redfield. On January 3, 2020, his opposite number, the head of the CDC in China, actually told Redfield that COVID-19 was not transmissible human to human. So the Chinese not only developed this, but they also lied about it. We can argue about whether this was engineered or not because that has not been fully determined, but the point is the Chinese turned SARS-CoV-2, this pathogen, into a biological weapon by lying about transmissibility when they knew it was highly contagious. And then, while they were locking down their own country, they were pressuring other countries, including the United States, to take arrivals from China without restriction. You put those two things together, Dan and Amy, and it shows that those 1.1 million Americans who have died from COVID-19, according to Johns Hopkins, they were murdered.
Well, so this is right because they covered up that this leak occurred at minimum, and at maximum, it's something worse than that. There was some purpose behind this. Now, that seems like, wait a second, they locked down their own country. Why they wouldn't inflict this on their own country? Well, I mean, President Xi and the Chinese communists aren't afraid to break a few eggs, as we've seen. So what's your working theory about, okay, it came from the lab, and it escaped, and they covered up and lied, or something else?
Oh, I think that it escaped. I mean, if you talk to people in China, they will say that Beijing deliberately wanted to kill off old Chinese, and so therefore it was a deliberate spread of the disease from the lab. I don't think so. I think it was a leak. But we know that once it was leaked, it was a deliberate spread beyond China's borders. There's really no other conclusion when you look at the facts, because there was a deliberate campaign to lie about the transmissibility of the disease. The only reason why you would lie about this is that so other countries, people like Redfield, would not recommend precautions that you would normally take in a viral outbreak like this. So, China has this doctrine of comprehensive national power, which is ranking countries' strength. And China wants to be number one. And I don't blame China for wanting to be number one, but we can blame them for the way they did it. They try to be number one by weakening everybody else, because that increases your comprehensive national power ranking. That's what they did. This was murder. We need to hold them to account, because if we don't hold them to account, Dan and Amy, they will spread the next disease.
But why did they want to spread it around the world? Did they want every country to have the same pain that they were under, experiencing the same pain?
Absolutely. And that's because of, they look at their own country. They knew that they were going to undergo terrible pain because of this disease. And so they thought, well, yeah, we're going to lose our CNP ranking. And so therefore they said, well, let's go after everybody else. We're going to spread this. And unfortunately, we don't have global leaders who are hoping or who are imposing costs on China for doing that. Because
but I mean, all governments, and particularly communist governments, operate under this promotion that they are infallible. I mean, they're never going, the Soviets in Chernobyl, they're never going to admit that this was a government failure, because that questions their legitimacy. I mean, and again, frankly, in the West, you, not maybe on this scale, but you see the same thing. Mistakes are always made. Nobody makes them when it comes to the government.
Well, in a democracy, people hold the president of the United States, they hold their senator, their congressman to account.
Sometimes.
You can't do that in China because of the nature of the political system.
Right, but I mean, but if this cloak of infallibility is pulled away, then that destabilizes their stranglehold on the country, don't you think?
Absolutely, and in a communist state, there's an added problem, and that is that communism talks about the forces of history, and that the Communist Party is a representative of history, and history can't be wrong. So that's why you don't have apologies from communist governments in general. And China's even worse, because you add in some cultural aspects to it. But really what you've got right now is a communist China that has realized it's gotten away with killing about 6.8 million people around the world outside of China. And it's saying to itself, well, look, Western leaders are weak. We can do what we want. And it's no coincidence that you have these bad actors like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea are now forming a new camp. This is a new Cold War, and they think that they can do what they want, as we can see from the invasion of Ukraine.
Is the President Xi spy balloon program, is that testing the West? Is that what that was about?
Yes, it was. We don't know why China was so brazen to do that. And there's alternate theories that one of them is the military was so powerful that it could do what it wanted without telling Xi Jinping. I think a more likely explanation is that Xi Jinping just wanted to humiliate the United States. His diplomacy is to tell countries the United States is in terminal decline, ditch them, obey China, and flying a large object over the United States is a perfect way of showing the world that the United States is incapable. And by the way, the Pentagon was pretty incapable. It tracked this from launch on Hainan Island. It allowed this to enter the 48 states without telling the commander-in-chief. Somebody in the Pentagon needs to lose their job. And I'm not talking about some lower-level guy. I'm talking about perhaps the Secretary of Defense or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Not telling the commander-in-chief of this balloon after it entered U.S. airspace for 4 days, someone's got to go.
I vote for both Austin and Milley. I want to get your take on something else, too, this intelligence that is being bandied about by the administration, that China is contemplating arming Russia in their effort to conquer Ukraine. Jake Sullivan was asked about that on Meet the Press yesterday. Why don't we make it public what we would intend to do, what the consequences would be if China was to do something like that? Here's what he said.
Well, we believe that this is better done directly with Chinese counterparts in private. And in fact, Secretary Blinken had the opportunity to meet with China's top diplomat at the Munich Security Conference just a few days ago. So we have channels to be able to make sure that China fully understands the U.S. position and what would happen were they to move forward with this step. And we don't see as much profit in microphone diplomacy on this.
Is Jake Sullivan right about that, Gordon?
Absolutely not. We've had private diplomacy with China for now 3 decades after the Cold War, producing horrible results. What Jake Sullivan said sounded good to the ear, but in fact has not worked. And by the way, China has already been supplying lethal assistance to Russia. They did it from the beginning of the war, and the administration doesn't want to acknowledge it. I think they don't want to acknowledge it because they don't want to impose costs. I don't know what's going through their minds, but I think that the American people should say, look, there are all of these reports of lethal assistance. Just tell us that these are false, or start imposing costs on China. And the American public deserves answers on this. I mean, the Breaking Defense website says that almost every day an Antonov AN-124, which is the largest cargo plane in the world, leaves China's Zhengzhou, which is in the central part of China, with ammunition and other high consumption rate items. And clearly, ammunition looks like lethal assistance to me. So why don't we hear answers from Jake Sullivan, Jake from the White House? Why doesn't he say, well, look, these reports are wrong? Or the American people need to confront him and say, start imposing those costs.
He is Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and The Great U.S.-China Tech War. Follow him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang, C-H-A-N-G. Gordon G. Chang is his handle on Twitter. Gordon Chang, thanks as always for your insights. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Dan and Amy. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Loved having you on the program. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Are you tired of how race, gender,